Hello everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Redneck channel. Today we're working on part 2 of our engine rebuild for the Farmall Super A. We have our new parts in to put in the engine. We've got the crank turned and have it back ready to put in, and so we'll get started. Our first order of business is put the new sleeves in the block. First step is the O-ring that seals the bottom of the sleeve. Now we want a little bit of lubrication on our sleeves before we put them in the block, and because the O-rings are rubber, you don't want to use oil because that can break down the rubber O-ring. So a little bit of dish soap. Doesn't take a lot. Give that a nice coating all around. And that should just push in by hand. Sometimes they require a little bit of encouragement. There we are. Now don't be alarmed that the cylinders don't go down flush. They're supposed to stick out above the deck about, I think it's 3 to 7 thousandths. So you should be able to feel the edge of them there, that they're sticking up a little bit. And that's how the head gasket seals to the cylinders. Next, we will get our new pistons ready to go in the engine. So to start with, we take the old pistons off. Now these pistons don't have front marked on them. Normally a lot of pistons have an arrow or some kind of mark indicating front of the engine, so that you would install them to the rods, paying attention that you're getting them facing the right way. These ones don't have any marking like that, so apparently it doesn't matter. So we connect those to our connecting rods. And install the new lock rings. Making sure they're seated correctly in the groove. And now we'll put the piston rings on. The set of piston rings comes basically in a long envelope. With the placement of each ring marked on the sleeve that the ring is in. So we'll start with our bottom ring, which is an oil ring, and these have a little coil spring inside to help keep tension out against the cylinder wall, and these are pretty near impossible to install without removing that coil spring and putting in the groove first. Then we carefully take our oil ring, slip over the top of the piston, and slip it down into the 4th groove, making sure that the little coil spring is underneath the piston ring all the way around. On a lot of piston rings, there's some sort of a mark indicating which side is the top side, which side goes up towards the top of the piston. Either be a dot or a little line, or in this case, it's in very, very fine letters. Probably can't see it on there, but it actually says top. So that kind of makes it quite clear. And so the side that says top goes towards the top of the piston. And you carefully slip it down to the 3rd ring, or 3rd groove, excuse me. And again, it's marked top. That one is stiff. Okay, this one I'm going to carefully all our rings are in place. We're going to take some oil now and lube up our cylinders. This puts a protective coating of oil on them. And just smear it all around, make sure it coats the inside of the cylinders well. At this point, we're going to install our pistons in the cylinders. So, one of the first things we have to do is put the bearings in the connecting rod. Get rid of the old bearing. The new bearing goes into the connecting rod. It has a locating tab there, and it goes in the notch on the connecting rod. And just use your thumbs and push it down into place. And then make sure you even up the ends in the rod. Give that a little dab of oil. And the piston rings have a gap in them, and so you stagger the gaps, meaning you don't get them all lined up together. You make sure they're in different places around the piston. And you don't want the gaps right on the sides perpendicular to the wrist pin either, because that's where the most pressure is on them, and it'll gouge the cylinder wall if you have the gap there. And we want to give our piston a good coat of oil. Then we install our piston ring compressor. Give her some more oil in on top. Want to make sure that's good and tight. Got the piston rings compressed into the groove. And on this particular engine, the numbers on the connecting rods go to the cam side of the engine, which is towards me. And now we basically just give it a careful shove down into the cylinder. There we go. Slips right in. So we're ready to install our main bearings now, and just like on the connecting rods, you find the locating tab and it goes in the notch on the main journal. And on your main bearings, one bearing has the thrust bearing shoulders on it, and that goes in the number 3 cap, the back one. When you press them in place, make sure you even up the ends. On these ones here, they're going to both be protruding just a little bit. And we'll give these a little dab of oil. Before we lay the crank in, we're going to find our dot on the cam gear. In this case, it's a single dot on a tooth here. On the opposite side of the cam gear, there are 2 dots, each in a valley either side of a tooth, and that will line up with our governor gear, which we'll get to later. But the single dot on this tooth lines up to a single dot on the cam, or on the crank. And so I've arranged the connecting rods so that we can lay the crank in and keep the studs in the connecting rods away from the journals on the crank. So we're going to set these in so that they are carefully. So those set onto the rods. And make sure that those are aligned. There we are. The main caps are numbered from 1 to 3. Small flat surface here will have a number stamped in. And the block also has a number stamped to correspond with each journal. And again, the back journal, number 3, is the one that takes the thrust bearing. And before I put these caps on, I'm going to put some oil on the crank. Make sure the number on the cap goes towards the number on the block. Next are the connecting rod caps, and we have the new bearings inserted to them as well. So a little splash of oil. Make sure your number is going towards the cam side of the engine. Numbers 2 and 3, I'm going to pull up carefully to meet the crank. We are going to tighten up our main caps now. The torque for these bolts is 75 foot-pounds. I'm going to do it in 2 steps. I'm going to go 40 and then 75. We'll tighten our connecting rod bolts now. Just snug them up with the ratchet, and then they tighten to 40 foot-pounds. And I'll do that in 1 step with the torque wrench. And we'll turn the crank so we can get the other 2. The main bearing bolts have a flat washer underneath them, kind of rectangular shaped, and you curl a corner up against the flat of the bolt to lock the bolt in place so it can't loosen up. The connecting rod bolts are cross-drilled, and they have castellated nuts to take either cotter key or wire. Now I'm going to use wire, and when you use wire, you put it across through the nut, cross it over, and across through the other bolt so that they're connected together and neither one can back off. Now we're going to cut off the extra wire here. Make sure you got a good hold of it so nothing drops down in the engine. On these, both of these ones, the nut is covering the hole, the slot for the wire. So I'm going to take an end wrench and tighten them just ever so slightly so that it exposes that hole. We're ready for our 2 aluminum sealing blocks, front and back, and they fit in like so, but they also have little felt bits that go in here. Little felt blocks, and it's best to soak them up with oil pretty good first. There's also a little cork gasket for each side underneath the block. Okay. And a little drop of oil where they sit will help them stick. Just put our little felt bits in. The trick with this is to get them started without knocking the felt bits out of the way. And so you can start one end and the other end if you kind of move the felt down in so it's already in the groove. And the gap down underneath the block. And just a little tap. There we are. Once it's started, you can take a longer bolt to locate the holes so it stays in line with the bolt hole that's supposed to fasten into. We're about ready to put the cylinder head on, so I'm going to give a little spot of oil on top of each piston. Next is our head gasket. They're often marked top. In this case it says this side out, which I assume means top. Manual calls for 65 foot-pounds on these head nuts. I'm going to do that in 2 stages, so I'm going to go 35 and then 65. And you start at the center bolt and then work in a circular pattern outward. We're ready to set our valve clearance now. Manual calls for 14 thousandths warm. This is a cold engine, so I'll set it for 14 thousandths now. Once we warm the engine up, then I'll reset them again. This engine is still set at top dead center number 1 compression stroke, so we can set cylinder number 1. The firing order is 1342, so another 180 degrees puts number 3 cylinder, top dead center compression stroke, and we can do it 180 more gives you the number 4, 180 more gives you number 2. Have our front cover ready to go on. The seal has been replaced. So we match our gasket up to the cover, and I'm going to use a couple of bolts to hold it in place while I put it on. It's time for our front pulley now. It is keyed to the crank and is a press fit. Here we go. The crank is threaded to take a 1/2 inch coarse thread bolt. So now we just tighten the bolt up and draw the pulley on. That's as far as we're going before we reinstall the engine back in the tractor. So that is the end of this video, this portion of the video. We will be installing the manifold and carburetor governor, the ignition system and timing the ignition, setting the governor and everything in our next video. So stay tuned for that. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave those in the comments section below. Please give the video a like, subscribe to my channel, and as always, have a great day.